Hey guys, tonight we're stepping off the modern map and slipping quietly into a time when the world was slower, stranger and spiced with mystery. The air is dry and it crackles with the heat of day-old sun trapped in sand. You're trudging through the Taklamakan Desert, whose name roughly translates to go in, and you won't come out. And you're not quite sure if that's a warning or a dare. The night breeze carries strange, sweet notes of cinnamon, mixing with the faint smell of camel sweat sandalwood and distant anxiety. You're wrapped in a woolen cloak that doesn't really help with the sand, and the caravan ahead of you creaks with the complaints of overburdened wheels and traders muttering about margins. Somewhere someone is singing a lullaby in a language you don't know about a spice you've never heard of, and you start to suspect that half the world's music may have been written to pass the time between one market and the next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I always love reading those. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You taste dust, but it's oddly comforting. Not the dry kind that makes you cough, but the nostalgic sort if there were such a thing as cinnamon-flavored memory loss. This would be it. And that's because the sack next to your face is bursting with bark from Ceylon, what we now call Sri Lanka. And it's not just for cookies. Cinnamon was currency, not metaphorically, like, oh, this is worth its weight in gold, kind of deal, but literal bundles of bark exchanged for silver slaves, horses, even apologies. Roman emperors had it scattered at funerals like confetti that smelled better. One emperor supposedly burned a year's worth of Rome's cinnamon to honor his dead wife. Historians still argue whether that's romantic or just terrible budgeting. You adjust your seat, by which I mean a weirdly shaped sack of cumin, and watch the stars smear across the sky like soft spice trails. The Silk Roads weren't a single trail, but a messy, glorious tangle of routes threading from China to the Mediterranean. And they never just carried silk. Spices rode camels, mules yaks, riverboats warships, and the occasional pocket. This trade didn't just pass through, it stained everything it touched. There's an odd paradox here. Cinnamon didn't change the world overnight. It didn't build pyramids or cause wars, well, not at first. But it whispered. It scented the world in a way you couldn't quite name, the same way a song lingers in your head, even after you've forgotten where you heard it. A merchant beside you clears his throat and says in a language you half understand that cinnamon protects against poison. You nod like you believe him. Later, you'll hear someone else say it cures snake bites. Someone else will swear it preserves meat. A monk once claimed it could ward off sin. Nobody agrees, and yet the cinnamon keeps moving mile after mile, belief after belief, sweet and spicy and just vague enough to be worth smuggling. Your eyes drift shut briefly as you pass under the shadow of a craggy ridge where local legend insists bandits once threw an entire cartload of cassia, a rougher cinnamon cousin, into a ravine because the seller insulted their camels. Historians still argue whether that story is true or just early marketing. Either way, someone definitely cried. The spice trade was a chaotic whisper network of rumors, desire, and pure stubborn wanderlust. Cinnamon came from trees with peeling bark, and yet somehow it had the authority to shape economies. Sometimes all it took was the suggestion of a spice to launch an expedition. You wonder how many ancient explorers just wanted to go somewhere that smelled better than home. You pass a cluster of tents lit from within, shadows move gently behind canvas making tea, telling ghost stories, maybe plotting minor trade fraud. The scent of cinnamon again, this time boiling in a battered pot. It doesn't smell sweet now. It smells serious, medicinal, slightly accusatory, like it knows you once tried to fake your way through Dort. Or Jutu wine with Sorichans Aru. A she George, spot sword. Breached you to no space in market in Kashgar by pretending to know what true bark meant. You didn't. A camel sneezes behind you and you jerk slightly, knocking over a crate. Out tumbles a tiny fabric pouch, someone else's stash. You peek inside. More cinnamon, this time rolled into thin curls like antique scrolls. You breathe it in and imagine it once sat in a Ming Dynasty apothecary, or aboard a Roman galley bouncing across waves while someone prayed it wouldn't get soaked. And still, here it is. Useless in some ways, immortal in others. Cinnamon didn't change everything, but everything changed while cinnamon watched. You settle back again, eyelids heavy. The desert whispers, the stars ripple, And somewhere in the future, someone will open a kitchen drawer, find a dusty glass jar, and never know they're smelling 2,000 years of longing. You wake, if you ever really slept, to the clinking of coins and the quiet crackle of a fire being coaxed back to life. The caravan has stopped beside a trickling oasis. Less a lake, more a humble puddle surrounded by hopeful reeds. You sit up joints protesting like disgruntled bureaucrats and stretch. Someone hands you a tin cup of lukewarm barley broth that somehow tastes faintly of cloves, and you wonder if it's intentional or just the residue of a well-traveled ladle. By now you've stopped asking. The day begins with dust, always with dust, but under it, you smell something sharper today, something musky, oily, floral, and a little too assertive. Nutmeg. Not the bakery sprinkle you're thinking of, but the real deal. Dense, oily seeds wrapped in a crimson lacy sheath called mace, which frankly sounds like it should be illegal. You're watching the packing of a small locked chest decorated with simple brass studs and chains. The merchant guarding it wears the kind of expression usually reserved for bodyguards or paranoid princes. You don't need to ask. The box contains nutmeg, or rather a small fortune in nutmeg. Nutmeg, like cinnamon, came from somewhere impossibly far away, specifically the Banda Islands, tiny dots in the Indonesian archipelago that you could easily miss on a map. But no one did. Not if they were serious about their spice game. The Banda Islands were the only known source of nutmeg for centuries. Just imagine that an entire world's worth of kitchens, apothecaries, and poisoners, depending on a few volcanic islands surrounded by reefs and rumors. Historians still argue whether the rise of certain coastal empires was more about nutmeg or naval supremacy, but the truth might be both. When spices made your kingdom rich, every ship was both a trader and a potential warship, and every port was one tantrum away from turning into a blockade. You fall into step with the merchant as the caravan gets moving again. He tells you, confidentially, that nutmeg can cure plague. Or at least delay it. Or maybe confuse it. The claim is foggy, like most pre-modern medical wisdom. In medieval Europe, people wore pouches of nutmeg around their necks to purify the air, which essentially meant, I hope this smells better than death. One of the camels up front sneezes violently. Everyone pauses. A man mutters something that sounds suspiciously like a prayer. The merchant clutches the chest tighter. It's easy to laugh now. But when half your world could be wiped out by something you couldn't see, you put your faith in what you could smell. Nutmeg didn't just flavor food, it flavored power. European elites paid obscene amounts for it, so much so that in the 17th century, the Dutch literally traded the entire island of Manhattan to the British in exchange for full control of nutmeg-producing Rhun Island. Yes, you heard that right, New York, for spice. Historians still argue whether it was a savvy move or the dumbest real estate deal in history. Either way, it tells you something about how serious people got over soup seasoning. As the sun climbs, the heat turns the desert into a griddle. You shade your eyes and watch dust shimmer on the horizon. Another caravan, maybe. Maybe ghosts. You can't tell anymore. Your thoughts swirl like a spice grinder nutmeg empire plague deal struck in languages now lost to time. And still none of it feels entirely real. What is real is the merchant beside you pulling a nutmeg from his pouch and letting you sniff it. It smells warm, rich, almost narcotic. You imagine someone once thought it was magic. Honestly, you sort of agree. Later, when the caravan pauses again beneath a rocky outcrop, someone roasts chickpeas over a tiny flame, tossing in nutmeg shavings with a dramatic flourish. It's delicious. Probably illegal somewhere. Definitely worth remembering. A younger trader leans over and tells you a story half-winked like a secret, that nutmeg was once used as a hallucinogen in French prisons. Prisoners desperate for escape would grind it, swallow it, and hope for visions. The results were mixed. Historians still argue whether nutmeg truly has psychoactive effects, or if desperate minds will trip over anything. Either way, you imagine those prisoners floating on dreams of spice islands far from the stench of reality. You wonder if some part of the nutmeg carried like a memory really does open doors inside the mind. The wind shifts again. You catch another note this time. It's not nutmeg, but the faint floral tinge of something else. Cardamom, clove, maybe a mix. You've started losing the ability to distinguish. And maybe that's the point. You ride on, lulled by camel steps, the creak of leather, and the knowledge that somewhere a tiny island's trees once dictated the price of luxury, the course of empires, and the boundaries of breakfast. Nutmeg didn't change the world. But the world that changed wars, colonies, capital cities, and conquests smelled faintly of nutmeg when it did. You're not sure what time it is. The sky looks like wet parchment, stained with saffron. And smoke, the sun hiding like it's embarrassed to be awake this early. Your eyes sting a little, not from tears, but from camel breath and road dust. There's a cart ahead of you that's rattling more than usual. You watch as a wheel hits a rut, and the whole thing jolts violently. And then it happens, a canvas sack tears open and hundreds, no thousands of tiny golden brown pods scatter across the trail. Cardamom. Some land in the dust. Some bounce onto your sandal. One somehow lodges in your sleeve, like a clingy memory. The merchant driving the cart doesn't even stop. He curses in 4 languages and waves dismissively as the others scramble to scoop up what they can. You crouch instinctively, picking up one pod, then another. They're tiny, sure, but they once bought palaces. Cardamom isn't as famous as cinnamon or nutmeg, but don't let that fool you. This little pod has seduced more than its fair share of royals, healers, and hot beverage enthusiasts. In India, it's been used for thousands of years in Ayurveda, in religious offerings, and, yes, in chai. You might think of it as that thing in the weirdly floral cookie, but here on the edge of the Hindu Kush, it's pure treasure. A passing trader chuckles. It freshens breath, he says, chewing a pod like it's gum. He winks. You raise a brow. He shrugs and walks off with the air of a man who's successfully used cardamom to flirt more than once. Historians still argue whether cardamom was ever as valuable as gold per gram. Some say yes, some roll their eyes. But there's no debate that it was expensive. It had to be getting it from the cardamom hills in southern India all the way to a banquet in Damascus or Venice. Took weeks, if not months, of risky travel. Pirates weather bribes it all added spice to the spice. You pocket a few pods. No one notices. Or maybe they do, and just assume you're underpaid. As you walk, the rhythm of the caravan starts to blend with the soft rattle of cardamom in your pouch. You're not even hungry, but the scent makes your stomach grumble anyway. Someone up ahead is boiling rice in a battered tin pot. You smell ghee, then cardamom, then cumin, then envy. You've realized something: the Silk Roads weren't just highways of commerce. They were recipes. You could trace a stew's flavor from Kashgar to Istanbul just by following who passed through, which outpost and which sack ripped open where. At a rest stop later that day, a storyteller appears. No one knows from where. He's old, draped in fabric that's more patch than cloth, and his voice sounds like the crackle of dried leaves. He tells a tale of a spice merchant who fell in love with a princess, won her heart with cardamom candies, and was then executed because, surprise, he wasn't royalty. But his ghost, he says, still haunts a ruined spice warehouse in Samarkand, whispering love poems that smell faintly of sweet milk and crushed pods. No one questions it. Honestly, it tracks. The sun lowers again. You climb a ridge and pause to look out across the plain. The world looks like a spilled spice wreck, dunes the color of turmeric, distant valleys, green like bay leaves, shadows sharp as cloves. You sit and let the breeze play tricks with your senses. Somewhere behind you, a camel makes a noise that can only be described as existentially offended. You find another cardamom pod in your pocket. You crack it open and chew the seeds like that trader did. They taste floral, warm, slightly bitter, like old love and forgotten stories. You don't know why, but you feel braver afterward. Cardamom may not have started any wars, but it definitely ended some dinners well. It was the spice of elegance, of the finer things, perfumes, tonics, indulgent desserts. Even in ancient Egypt, people were buried with cardamom, because if the afterlife was real, they didn't want to go in there with bad breath. Historians still argue whether cardamom's popularity waned during certain dynasties due to shifting trade winds or just trend fatigue. Either way, it always came back. It's hard to quit something that makes rice pudding taste like poetry. Night falls again, soft and wide. Campfires spark to life across the plain like lazy stars. You lie back on a folded cloak, listening to someone nearby humming a lullaby in a minor key. The cardamom pod you're chewing is down to its last whisper of flavor, but it lingers just long enough to remind you small things in the right moment leave a mark. You watch the sky fade into velvet. Somewhere a camel hiccups, and the Silk Road marches on. It's nearly dawn again, and the caravan has hit a salty wind blowing in from the coast. Your tongue is dry, your feet are caked with powdered earth, and you've learned that your personal scent is now equal. Parts cumin, fatigue and regret. But as the sun rises and glints off the horizon, there's something else in the air, sharp, biting, unmistakable. Pepper. Black pepper, to be precise. Not the table shaker kind you forget is there. This is the kind that commands attention. Spicy, earthy, slightly citrusy. And so potent, it practically slaps you awake. You pass a group of traders guarding a cluster of heavy sacks marked with crude pepper drawings. They're hunched, protective, watchful. You'd think they were hauling live tigers or royal secrets. One of them has a cutlass at his hip, not for show. Another casually refers to a pepper ransom the way others mention tea. And here's where things get weird. Pepper, yes, the stuff that's now an afterthought at dinner, once paid ransoms. Real ones. During the sack of Rome in 410 CE, the Visigoths demanded 3,000 pounds of pepper as part of the city's ransom. Not gold, not jewels. Pepper. Historians still argue whether that was a strategic choice or just a spicy insult. But it worked. Rome paid. Pepper got handed over, probably in sacks just like the ones creaking beside you now. You trail a little closer to the pepper merchants, keeping your distance but breathing in their wake. It's heady, intoxicating. There's something about pepper that doesn't just flavor, it electrifies. In the ancient world, it was considered a medicine, an aphrodisiac, and a heat source for the soul. The Romans were obsessed with it. The Chinese liked it less hot, but still valued it. In India, where it grew in tangled jungle vines, it was treated like a temperamental treasure. A little further down the trail, a young boy selling dried figs tries to hawk a single peppercorn for the equivalent of a month's wages. You pass, but you admire the hustle. Later, in a dusty tent, you hear a story passed around like a skin of wine. Once, a pepper shipment meant for a king was hijacked by pirates. The pirates, not knowing the value, burned half the cargo for warmth. Upon discovering their mistake, they renamed their entire fleet the Burnt Tongue in shame, or pride. Hard to tell with pirates. Historians still argue whether that story is pure fiction, but records from the Malabar coast do mention pepper pirates and mysterious disappearances. So maybe it's not completely made up. Maybe someone somewhere cried over roasted peppercorns. You pick up a loose grain on the path. It's small, wrinkled, unremarkable. But somehow this little black bead powered global obsessions, colonial conquests, and countless shady deals. It's said that in Renaissance Europe, peppercorns were stored in locked boxes like jewels. Venetian merchants rigged the markets by storing pepper in dark, cool cellars to control supply. Talk about spice manipulation. One trader beside you huffs and mutters, "Pepper makes princes," or widows. You don't ask him to explain. You're not sure you want to know. At midday, you share a meal, lentils, rice, and a barely stewed bird whose flavor would offend modern food critics. But then the cook sprinkles crushed pepper on top, and it all transforms. The heat blooms in your mouth sharper than the sun, and suddenly the desert doesn't seem so endless. Pepper annoyingly makes everything seem worthwhile. And that's the trick, isn't it? Pepper changed everything, not because it was essential, but because it felt essential. It made food come alive. It gave trade its edge. It made people chase it across oceans, around capes, through plague ports, and past tax collectors. It was desire distilled into a seasoning. And yet, pepper never made anyone immortal. Never saved an empire for good. It changed everything. And then nothing stayed changed. You think about the peppercorn in your pouch. You'll keep it. Not as a snack, but as a reminder value isn't always about utility. Sometimes it's about the story people are willing to tell to make something feel vital. The caravan slows near a fortress town where taxes are collected based on the weight of your dreams, or at least your cargo. The pepper sacks are shifted, weighed, prodded, grumbled over. You hear the clang of coins, the shuffle of documents, and one very specific threat involving a peppercorn being shoved somewhere unpleasant. You smile because you're tired, but also because even the bureaucracy smells better when spices are involved. That night, under a canopy of stars and horsehair tent fabric, someone tells the story of a woman who used pepper to escape an arranged marriage, claiming an allergy so violent it could kill her. It worked. She ended up marrying a ginger merchant instead. The punchline naturally is that he later faked a cinnamon allergy to get out of dinner with her parents. Historians still argue whether that tale was moral, romantic, or just gastrointestinal commentary. Probably all three. As the fire dies down, you hear a peppercorn pop in the coals, like a tiny explosion. You drift off thinking that if you ever get back home, you'll never look at a salt and pepper shaker the same way again. The world didn't tilt on its axis because of pepper. But once for a while, it definitely shook. By now, your legs move on their own. Your sandals flap softly against the packed trail. worn smooth by centuries of stubborn feet and even more stubborn trade. The caravan stretches thin ahead of you, like a loose thread unraveling across the dust. The wind changes again, bringing with it a sweetness that doesn't belong to flowers or fruit. It's richer, darker, a little haunted. Nutmeg again. No, it's something deeper, mysterious, almost medicinal. This is mace, the bright red lace that wraps itself around a nutmeg seed, like a silk scarf, over a secret. And here, where spice is power and cargo is gossip, you're getting close to the source of one of the oldest, bloodiest bargains in history, the Banda Islands. Tiny green gems floating in Indonesia's far eastern seas, the Bandas were the only place in the known world where nutmeg trees grew naturally. For centuries, they were the epicenter of flavor and madness. And as your caravan nears a port town that ferries goods from those very islands, you hear the stories come in with the tide. A sailor leans over a bowl of fish stew laced with mace and tells you about the ghosts of Banda. Not actual ghosts, but memories so sharp they leave behind scents. He says if you stand alone on the docks at night, you can still smell cloves burning mingled with blood and colonial ink. You eat the stew anyway. You'd heard that European powers once traded lives islands and even entire cities for nutmeg. But it's more unsettling to hear that those trades weren't theoretical. They involved heads on Pikes treaties signed under cannon fire, and entire villages erased because their trees were too valuable. In 1621, the Dutch East India Company, imagine a government with a company logo, massacred the native Bandanese population after they resisted a monopoly agreement. The island's spice production was seized, its people enslaved, its fields managed. Nutmeg, it turns out, didn't just spark a culinary revolution, it also ignited some of the earliest and most brutal forms of corporate imperialism. Historians still argue whether the Banda massacre was the first true spice war atrocity or just the best documented. But no one doubts it happened. You pause by a crate being loaded onto a ship stamped with VOC branding, Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the Dutch East India Company's long proud name. Inside the crate, nutmeg and mace. Pure. Whole. Fragrant enough to cover a war crime. A merchant nearby hums as he checks the seals. To him, this isn't history, it's inventory. You walk on shaken in a way you didn't expect. For all the talk of romance and flavor, the spice trade also trafficked in silence. The silence of voices snuffed out of fields cleared of names forgotten under layers of cinnamon-scented comfort. These spices didn't just travel in bags, they traveled with ghosts. And yet the Bandas themselves, those tiny specks in the sea, kept growing their nutmeg trees. You imagine one still standing after the last ship left leaves, rustling with stories no one asked for. Maybe a child once hid in the roots, breathing in the warm musky air, swearing to never trust a merchant again. Back at camp, someone roasts dried fruit and dusts it with powdered mace. The aroma is dizzying spicy but floral-like perfume with an agenda. You take a bite and taste heat sweetness and something else. A tinge of melancholy. Mace was always more fragile than nutmeg. It bruised, easily cracked under pressure. But it was also more beautiful. Some said it had healing properties. Others claimed it drove people mad in high doses. You believe both. One old woman at the fire insists that a Bandanese widow once killed a Dutch officer using only mace and patience. She smiles crookedly and refuses to explain further. Historians still argue whether mace was truly a weapon or merely metaphor. But here, in the flickering shadows, no one wants to argue with her. The stars creep back out like curious eyes. You lie down with the faint smell of nutmeg oil lingering on your skin. The night is warm. Too warm. You think of ships burning, islands sold, spices stolen then worshipped. You think of a world that changed not just because people loved flavor, but because they loved joy. Because they thought, wandering to the depths can trimper, les anges de gorge, doritos churi, de pezikribib. Iman de des fetons, nice more. The ghosts of Banda drift quietly through your dreams. They don't say much, but they smell incredible. You wake to the sound of rustling silk and low conspiratorial laughter. Someone's trying to sneak out of camp with something tucked tightly under their arm. You squint against the rising sun and catch a glimpse of crimson cloth wrapped around a cylindrical case. Letters. Or maybe scrolls. Definitely secret. Then the scent hits you. Not strong, but unmistakable. A kind of sweet sharpness. Like warm breath on a cold morning mixed with a whisper of darkness. Clove. The pouch in your belt still holds a few pods of cardamom and pepper. But cloves. Cloves. are a different story. Not something you toss into stew without thought. These are power players. Tiny dried flower buds with a punch that could silence a room or flavor an empire. You follow the figure at a lazy pace, more curious than suspicious. They vanish behind a line of wind-bent tamarisk trees, but you find what they left behind: a small abandoned bundle wrapped in palm bark and tied with faded blue thread. You untie it carefully. Inside, there are 3 things: a folded parchment letter written in 2 languages, a dried sprig of cloves, and a tiny bronze pendant shaped like a crescent moon. The letter smells faintly of clove oil. You can't read most of it, but a few words jump out, words like escape, forgive, and wait. You suddenly realize you're holding what is likely a farewell, or a confession, or maybe both. You put the letter back and carry the bundle to the fire where someone is already boiling water and adding rice. You hesitate, then drop the clove sprig in the pot. Clove is one of those spices that, like a good apology, doesn't take much to do the job. It's potent, pungent. It numbs the tongue, soothes toothaches, and has been used in medicine since, well, forever. Ancient Chinese doctors prized it. Arab traders adored it. European royals obsessed over it. The Ming Dynasty even made clove breath a requirement at court audiences. Historians still argue whether that was for hygiene or intimidation. And the place they all came from: the Maluku Islands, also called the Spice Islands. A fantasy of forests growing currency. The trees there, Syzygium aromaticum, bloomed little pink buds that once dried became these stiff nail-like marvels. Some cultures even called cloves nails of paradise. Others just called them worth your life. Back then, cloves were worth their weight in gold. Not a saying. Literally. You could trade a small pouch for enough food to feed a village, or for a new horse, or apparently for a seat on a fast ship leaving under questionable circumstances. You chew one absent-mindedly. Your tongue tingles. It numbs your molars and makes your throat feel like a library. Quiet, layered full of secrets. Later in the day, you meet a woman named Salima at a roadside market in a town that seems built entirely from shade and promises. Her stall smells like cloves. Yes, but also ink and rose water. She sells spices, but speaks like a poet. You buy a bundle of clove sticks and she throws in a vial of oil for your sleep. She says, smiling knowingly. You don't ask what she means. She's already moved on to a new customer, explaining how cloves once warded off demons in East Africa. Or maybe just bad breath. Historians still argue whether cloves were more prized for their flavor or their mythos. Their presence in ancient shipwrecks like the famous Java Sea wreck proves they were deeply embedded in maritime trade long before Europeans showed up pretending they'd discovered things. You walk on clutching the oil and wondering how many lives were rerouted, rewritten, or erased because someone wanted their mulled wine to hit a little harder. Night falls over another temporary encampment. Traders lounge in the dim glow of lanterns, telling tall tales and sipping tea that's practically weaponized with cloves and cinnamon. You sit near a quiet man, stirring his drink with a twig. He tells you, without being asked, that he once sailed for 20 days to fetch a single bag of cloves. My brother died, he says, staring into the fire. The storm took him. You nod slowly. Was it worth it? He shrugs. They paid me double. You don't ask more. You both sip tea. It burns. Cloves changed everything. And then nothing stayed the same. They flavored farewells. They masked death. They lit up joy. They traveled in scroll cases and love letters, and maybe someone used them to say the one thing that words couldn't. Later, as you curl into your blanket, you unstop the vial of clove oil and let a single drop fall onto your wrist. The scent rises, earthy warm, with just a hint of longing. You breathe in and imagine a letter that never made it words. Never. Read a promise soaked in spice. Somewhere in the distance, a camel sighs. And you dream of cloves nailed gently into the pages of a history that was never fully written. You awaken to a chill breeze rattling the flaps of the tent. It's morning, but not the usual warm breath of daybreak. It's colder with a bite that sneaks through layers of wool and memory. You wrap your shawl tighter and step out onto the path where breakfast is already sizzling over a small fire. Someone's boiling goat broth again, but this time the steam curling into the air is laced with something unexpected. A hint of licorice. No star anise. That 8-pointed spice star floats lazily in the pot, like a constellation come to boil. You lean over and inhale deeply. The scent is sweet, almost mentholated, a cousin to fennel, but sharper, more confident. Someone nearby is grinding dried roots with a stone pestle and muttering about digestion, winter, and Mongols. Your ears perk up. Mongols. A trader chuckles. They used it in tea, he says, or soup, or whatever that broth was. Nobody argued with them. You don't blame him. The Mongol Empire was more than just horsemen and arrows. It was one of the great redistributors of flavor. Genghis Khan and his successors didn't just conquer. They connected. From the Yellow River to the Danube, roads opened, cultures collided. And yes, spices flowed like gossip in a royal court. Star anise, while mostly grown in southern China, found its way west through Mongol supply chains, winding up in bowls shared under tents stretched across the steppes. You imagine it now, warriors hunched beside roaring fires, sipping steaming broth from metal cups, the spice numbing their lips as they plan the next siege. Historians still argue whether the Mongols truly used star anise regularly, or if its association with their culture is more modern myth. But either way, the scent seems to suit them, piercing sharp and strangely comforting once you get used to it. The merchant you're walking beside this morning hums softly and tosses another star into the pot. Keeps demons away, he says. And ungrateful sons-in-law. He grins. You believe him. As the caravan moves again, you fall into step with a cart carrying bundles of dried herbs, seeds, and mystery. The spice master, a wiry woman with ink-stained fingertips and a hawk-like gaze, opens a drawer and offers you a pinch of crushed star anise to chew. The flavor hits instantly, sharp, floral, almost electric. Your mouth goes cool, your sinuses clear, and for a moment you feel like you could outrun a horse. That feeling passes quickly. A rider gallops past his saddlebag, bouncing and releasing a trail of dry seeds that scatter behind him like breadcrumbs for birds with elevated palates. You pick one up. It's hard, fragrant, and shaped like a question. In a town later that day, you stop by a clay-walled tea house where the locals sip a cloudy broth that smells like memory and mischief. Star anise floats in every cup. The owner says the spice keeps the soul aligned with the stars. You nod, politely sip once, and feel slightly more aligned, though that might just be the strong liquor he secretly added. That night, someone tells the tale of a Mongol general who gave star anise laced tea to his prisoners, not as poison, but as comfort. They died warm, the storyteller says, and confused. Historians still argue whether that particular general even existed or if it's just a parable told to make sharp spices seem gentle. Regardless, it's a good story. And in this part of the world, that's often more important than truth. You settle beneath a half-collapsed lean-to, your bedroll smelling faintly of anise and wood smoke. Overhead, stars scatter across the sky like misplaced spices. You wonder if someone somewhere once looked at a bowl of soup and saw the heavens reflected back. You dream of warm broth, hoofbeats in the snow, and a lone rider carrying flavor through history. The star in your pocket doesn't speak, but it listens. You're halfway across a plateau now, where the wind never seems to stop talking. It whistles through your scarf, pulls at your sleeves, and tries to lift every loose thought from your head. The terrain has changed again, rocky, golden, sun-scoured. And as you crest a low ridge, your nose twitches. Not with spice this time, but something theatrical. It smells expensive. It smells suspicious. It smells like saffron. The caravan has stopped near a market town, small, fortified, and clearly wealthier than it has any right to be. You follow the crowd into a courtyard surrounded by merchants, and at the center of it all is a man wearing robes so yellow they're nearly gold, holding aloft a tiny vial like he's presenting the crown jewels. It contains just a few threads. Thin, red gold, delicate. Saffron. He announces the price in 3 currencies, 2 dialects, and at least 1 wink. You don't know what's more ridiculous, the price or the fact that people are lining up anyway. You inch closer and catch a glimpse of the merchant's hands stained orange from saffron threads. You've seen those fingers before. He sold pistachios last week, maybe almonds the week before. Today, apparently, he's the saffron king, and the crowd believes him. Saffron has always worn a mask. Technically, it's the dried stigma of a crocus flower, specifically Crocus sativus. But in practice, it's theater. Each flower only has 3 stigmas, and they must be harvested by hand before sunrise, gently plucked and dried like they're glass. It takes something like 75,000 flowers to produce 1 pound. So naturally, everyone wants it. Everyone also fakes it. Historians still argue whether ancient traders added paprika, turmeric, or even crushed brick dust to bulk out saffron shipments. Most agree that at least a third of it at any given time was fraudulent, But what's a little fraud when the product smells like divinity and makes your rice look like royalty? The merchant catches your eye and offers a sample. Just one thread dropped into warm water. You watch as it bleeds golden streaks like sunlight leaking into a bowl. You take a sip. It tastes earthy, slightly bitter, a little metallic like gold that got tired of being metal and wanted to be flavor instead. Someone nearby tells the story of a Persian noble who faked his own death to avoid taxes and re-emerged 5 years later as a saffron dealer with a new name and a better mustache. He made more as a fraud than as a lord, they say. You believe them. He probably smelled better too. Saffron wasn't just about cooking. It was used in perfume, dyes, medicine, religious rituals, and supposedly even as an aphrodisiac. Cleopatra is said to have bathed in it. Greek physicians used it to treat melancholy. Medieval monks banned it from certain monasteries for being too stimulating. Historians still argue whether saffron truly had any medicinal value or just made people feel better because they thought it should. But the effect was undeniable. Just carrying it made you feel potent. You buy a few strands. You can't afford them, but the merchant seems amused by your haggling and throws in a few extra. As you walk away, you realize your fingers are stained now too, faint orange streaks, like someone pressed the sun into your skin. Later, as the caravan moves on, you catch snippets of new scams. A man selling saffron-scented scrolls that smell like lemon rind. A teenaged girl whispering that she knows where the real saffron is hidden for a price. Someone else selling crushed marigold petals as desert saffron. You start to suspect that half the caravan is involved in a saffron scam, and the other half is knowingly buying into it. It's a circular economy built on color scent and sheer performance. And yet somewhere in the mess of fraud and flattery, the real thing still floats. Somewhere crocus flowers are blooming and tired hands are plucking red threads by candlelight. Somewhere a bowl of saffron rice will be served to someone who never questions what it took to make it shimmer like that. You stop to rest as dusk pulls its curtain across the landscape. The wind dies for once, and the air is still. You drop a single saffron thread into your cup of water and watch the swirl of gold again. It moves like smoke, trapped in liquid. A dream wearing silk robes. Saffron didn't change the world, but it convinced enough people that it did. And sometimes that's all you need. You're walking again, feet crunching over gravel so fine it almost sings beneath your sandals. The landscape has shifted to warm ochre and deep bronze cliffs carved by wind and maybe a little ambition. Traders around you have loosened their scarves, muttering about sore backs and suspicious cheese, but someone near the middle of the caravan lets out a satisfied sigh. It smells like turmeric. Not the gentle turmeric in your grandma's curry. This is raw, earthy, pungent, almost musky. It clings to your senses like old advice, persistent, useful, slightly bitter if misapplied. The Source A healer's wagon. Covered in faded linens and bristling with dried herbs, this one rumbles more than it rolls. Inside sits an old man, part doctor, part myth, wearing a robe dyed the same golden yellow as the powder he's grinding in a stone bowl. His fingers are stained deep orange, and they twitch like they've ground turmeric since before spices had names. He calls you over, waves a hand, and offers a taste. You hesitate. He insists. You place a pinch on your tongue. It's warm, chalky, faintly metallic, and suddenly you're tasting every wound that ever healed. Turmeric has always been more than food. In India, it's sacred, used in marriage rituals, funerals, and the blessings of new homes. Ayurveda names it as a purifying agent. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's for unblocking things, livers, emotions, probably bad decisions too. In medieval Europe, they didn't know what to do with it, so they called it Indian saffron and hoped for the best. Historians still argue whether turmeric's reputation as a miracle cure is based more on hope than results. But modern science has grudgingly admitted that curcumin, turmeric's active compound, does seem to do something. Anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-boredom, at least when mixed into rice. You glance back at the healer's fingers. They look like they've never been clean. You ask him if that bothers him. He says clean fingers forget what they touched. Fair enough. A passing trader mentions that in some villages, brides are covered in turmeric paste before weddings to cleanse the body and ward off evil. You imagine a woman glowing gold in candlelight, not sure whether she's being purified or pickled. You keep walking, and the scent of turmeric rides the wind. It's not seductive like saffron nor shocking like clove. It's steady. It smells like work, like home, like something your bones remember even if your mouth doesn't. Later, a camel stumbles on a loose stone and kicks over a small basket. Turmeric roots spill onto the ground, ugly wrinkled things like baby carrots that lived hard. You pick one up. It smells stronger than the powder, more primal, less polite. You bite it. Mistake. Your entire mouth erupts in bitterness and heat. A passing merchant cackles and offers you a slice of dried fig to chase it down. You'll be healthy now, he says. Or angry. Sometimes same thing. Historians still argue whether turmeric was more valuable for health color or symbolism. In some cultures, it was used to mark thresholds, literal and metaphorical. The doorway to a home. The transition from childhood to adulthood. The line between sick and healing. You think of the healer, again still grinding away in his wagon, painting the world yellow one smear at a time. That evening, a fight breaks out near a cooking fire. Nothing serious, just two traders arguing about whether turmeric belongs in dessert. One claims it's sacred, the other claims it's just good in custard. They eventually settle on adding it to spiced milk and calling it a truce. You're handed a cup. The drink is warm, soothing, gold-like sunrise. You sip slowly and feel something settle in your chest. Not peace exactly, but patience. Turmeric wasn't dramatic. It didn't fuel empires or buy kingdoms. But it clung. It cured. It colored every meal that mattered. It was the spice of staying power. And tonight, you sleep with golden breath and fingers faintly stained, prove that some things don't need to dazzle to endure. The next morning arrives slowly, as if unsure whether it's welcome. Your joints crack, your blankets damp from dew, and you're pretty sure a goat stepped on your hand sometime around midnight. You sit up, rub your eyes, and reach for your flask, only to find a crust of salt gathered at the cap. Not sugar, not spice. Salt. You glance around. The others have noticed it too. Their belongings, even their clothes, carry the same fine grit. The air smells sharper, cleaner. Somewhere nearby is a salt flat, vast and white and blinding in the sunlight. But that's not what holds your attention. It's the scent that rides above the salt, something woody, warm, and just a little wild. It's long pepper. You spot it piled on a worn cloth near the feet of an elderly trader. Its spindly cones looking like someone accidentally sun-dried a pine branch. Most people wouldn't know what it is. Fewer would dare try it. But those who do, never forget. Long pepper came before black pepper. It was once the spice. The Romans loved it. The Greeks respected it. Indian physicians wrote about it centuries before cloves even thought about being fashionable. But then it faded, replaced by the easier to harvest, easier to transport black pepper we all know today. Historians still argue whether long pepper vanished because of logistics or just lost a PR battle. But here it is, quiet and stubborn, still smoldering in the desert air. You take a piece in your fingers. It's dry, knobby, and smells like fire. And incense had a child. You bite the tip. The heat is slower than black pepper, but deeper, more of a murmur than a shout. It spreads across your tongue like a whispered conspiracy. The man selling it chuckles. That one changes your heartbeat, he says. If it doesn't, you're already dead. You believe him, only slightly joking. Around the fire that night, someone tosses a few long peppers into a stew. The pot hisses, the steam rising like ancient prayers. You sip it slowly, tasting not just heat, but history. This was the spice that sailed with Roman generals, was recorded in the ancient Sanskrit texts, and even used as tribute to Persian kings. One man claims that Alexander the Great took long pepper with him into battle, not as rations, but as medicine. You raise an eyebrow. For wounds, you ask. No, he says. For courage. Historians still argue whether long pepper was actually prized in military circles or just romanticized after the fact, but no one denies its potency, physical or poetic. The next morning, you pass a salt trader balancing baskets of white crystal beside curled-up cones of long pepper. She offers a smile and a deal. Salt tells your body where it is, she says, but pepper tells it what to do. You trade a scrap of silk for a small pouch. As you tie it to your belt, you think of all the meals this spice once changed and all the others it disappeared from. Long pepper didn't conquer the world, but for a while it flavored the people who tried. You walk on the salt, sticking to your boots, the pepper warm against your hip. And though you've tasted spicier things, nothing feels quite as old or as quietly proud as this nearly forgotten cousin of modern heat. You glance back once more. The salt flat stretches like a mirror toward the horizon, empty and dazzling. In a world obsessed with newness, long pepper stayed ancient, and in your mouth the flavor still glows. You're moving through greener land now, though green feels like too clean a word. This is wild green feral, tangled, noisy. Birds screech in branches overhead. Bugs perform small symphonies at your ankles. The path underfoot is damp and smells faintly of wet wood decay and licorice. You stop. Inhale. Yes, definitely, licorice. It's not the sweet synthetic stuff of modern candy. It's richer, earthier, edged with bitterness and old soil. It smells like medicine trying to disguise itself as a treat. You follow your nose and soon find the source, a squat man hunched beside a crate of dried roots, each looking like it clawed its way out of a grave. Glycyrrhiza glabra, he says proudly, though you definitely didn't ask. Licorice root, the original multitasker. People chewed it for digestion, for sore throats, to mask the taste of other worse medicines, and occasionally to get a quick energy boost. Egyptian pharaohs were buried with it. Greek athletes used it like an ancient protein bar. Chinese herbalists brewed it into nearly everything. And according to one grinning traveler beside you, Roman emperors chewed it during battles to stay hydrated, which sounds unlikely, but you file it away anyway. Historians still argue whether licorice actually improves stamina, or if ancient soldiers just liked to feel like they were doing something between skirmishes. Either way, it found its way into trade routes not through seduction or flavor, but through utility, which in spice circles is like being the one who actually brings the tent pegs. Not glamorous, but without it, nothing holds. The merchant offers you a piece to chew. It's tough, fibrous. You bite down and feel the flavor bloom across your tongue. Sweet, at first. Then, strangely cooling like mint's moodier cousin. The aftertaste lingers, leaving your breath vaguely medicinal, like you just finished a polite argument with a pharmacist. A young man approaches with a small vial. Licorice tincture, he says. Good for voice. Or lies. You buy it. As the day wears on, the jungle opens into flatter terrain where apothecaries once passed recipes on scraps of leather and silk. Licorice was nearly always included, not because it made anything delicious, but because it made things bearable. It bound ingredients softened bitterness, soothed the stomach, and in some rare cases hid poisons. You hear a tale around the fire of a disgraced doctor who saved a princess using only licorice and vinegar. Depending on who's telling it, he either married her or was thrown into a pit full of snakes. Possibly both. Historians still argue whether licorice was ever truly political. But in a world where everything was trade and trust, any root that helped you lie better or speak longer was going to find its place in someone's pouch. As night settles, you meet a scholar riding with the caravan. She tells you she's studying ancient pharmacology and believes licorice was the uncredited star of half the Silk Road's exchanges. Everyone wanted cinnamon, she says, but everyone needed licorice. You nod, chewing another sliver of root. She's not wrong. Back in camps, someone offers a pipe filled with licorice leaf and honey. You decline politely. But the smoke that curls up into the night smells like lullabies and hospital corridors. You lie back, head on a folded robe, and think about all the trades that didn't make history. Tiny. Quiet. Ones that made life slightly less terrible. Licorice didn't win wars or fuel desire. But maybe it helped people talk their way out of both. You drift off with the taste still faint on your tongue. Not quite sweet. Not quite bitter. Just useful. And in the end, maybe that's the flavor that lingers longest. You're back near the sea again. The air tastes like iron and distant fish, and your boots squelch slightly with each step along the muddy path. A storm passed through last night, leaving puddles like polished mirrors, and a hush across the camp like even the birds know something important is coming. The smell hits first. Not from above, but from below. Ginger, not powdered, not pickled, not sugared like a tea-time treat. This is the real thing. Fresh ginger root, damp and knobby, still streaked with dirt. A merchant is unloading crates from a battered cart, and as one tilts, you catch a glimpse of waterlogged labels and dried seaweed. The crates are from a shipwreck. Storm brought up half the coast, someone mutters nearby, and half someone's cargo with it. You squat beside the crates. They're swollen, cracked, but intact. Inside, the ginger is packed tight with straw and clay, an ancient preservation trick. You pick up a piece. It's heavy in your hand, firm and fragrant. You brush off a clump of silt and imagine it traveling not in your pouch, but in the belly of a wooden vessel tossed through monsoon winds. Ginger has traveled longer than most empires have lasted. It's one of the oldest traded spices known in both the East and West before the two even agreed on what direction was up. From ancient India to China, Arabia to Rome, ginger was everywhere. For digestion, for heat, for charm. In Tang Dynasty kitchens and Venetian perfumeries. In medieval love potions and Chinese dumplings. Historians still argue whether ginger first traveled overland or by sea. But everyone agrees on one thing. It always arrived with a story. You hear one now. A sailor near the wreck site swears the ship was cursed, doomed not by pirates but by bad ginger. Over-harvested, he says grimly, angered the gods. Another nearby disagrees. Captain was greedy, he says. Tried to stretch fresh ginger with dried bark and tree root. Whole sea turned on him. You sip your water slowly and say nothing. Nearby, a cook is experimenting. He's made a flatbread with slivers of raw ginger and wild honey. You try a bite. It's fire and sweetness in one, a slap and a hug at the same time. You nod, wide-eyed. He grins and throws more root into the fire for the smell. As the scent curls into the camp, people start sharing. Stories come out. A trader tells of her grandmother who rubbed ginger juice on her temples to keep demons away. Another recalls being fed hot ginger broth after getting sick from drinking river water. A scholar chimes in. The Romans used it as a preservative, called it zingiberis. Pliny wrote about it. Expensively. You nod, ginger still tingling on your tongue. It tastes like resilience, like someone who refuses to sit quietly in a stew. Later, you sit alone on a flat rock above the tide line, the wreckage below, now mostly buried again in sea foam and stories. You cradle a piece of root in your palm, thinking about how far it traveled, how many ship's carts and hands it passed through. It was never glamorous, never royal, but it endured. Ginger didn't inspire revolutions, but it survived them. It flavored survival. It outlasted storms, empires, and mediocre cooks. It spiced tea in a Mongol yurt and meat in a Mughal palace. It hid in shipwrecks and rose again with the tide. Back in camp, someone adds it to soup, and the air fills with the scent of warmth reborn. You breathe it in, and for once, everything feels digestible. The next stretch of road winds upward, spiraling slowly into higher hills, where the trees grow thinner and the air carries a crisp bite. Your lungs thank you, but your legs file a quiet complaint. You keep climbing boots, brushing past herbs, sprouting wild among the stones. Then you smell it. Something green, sharp, almost floral, but wrapped in a deep herbal musk. Not oregano, not mint. This is more ceremonial, more sacred. Bay leaves. You find them in bunches hanging from the pack of a traveling herbalist. They're dried to a pale olive color, curling at the edges like old parchment, and she's arranging them with care, binding them with twine, and slipping them into scroll cases. Too many leaves spoil the stew. She mutters half to herself, half to the donkey she's talking to like a colleague. Bay leaves, the quiet nobility of the spice world. Never loud, never showy, but always present, hiding in soups, stews, broths, and history books. They were symbols of wisdom and victory, of prophecy and power. Wreaths of laurel, the very same plant crowned the brows of emperors, poets, and students who answered all the right questions. Historians still argue whether the bay used in cooking today is the same laurel used to crown ancient Greeks and Romans, or whether time swapped species and just kept the symbolism. But no one denies the weight of those leaves, figurative and otherwise. You walk beside the herbalist for a while. She says little, just tosses a bay leaf into her tea and offers you a sip. It tastes subtle, woodsy, like someone whispering, "Calm down," in a library voice. She tells you about the secret king's merchants who never ruled cities but controlled spice routes, who never sat on thrones but whose ledgers could topple dynasties. Bay leaves, she says, were their mark, tucked into deals, sewn into garments, crushed and scattered beneath new caravans as protection. Not flashy, she says, but persistent. Later, as you pass through a narrow mountain pass, the wind shifts again and carries with it the scent of slow-cooked meat. You follow it to a way station where an elderly cook is brewing stew in a copper pot the size of a barrel. Bay leaves float near the surface, swirling in slow circles like contemplative leaves in a fountain. Don't eat them, the cook warns, tapping the pot. Not poisonous, just rude. You chuckle and nod. Everyone knows that one person who swallowed a bay leaf whole and never trusted stew again. Bay leaves are funny like that. They're not edible, not really. Not bold either. But leave one out and you'll know. There's a ghost in the flavor. An absence. A missing hum beneath the melody. One of the younger traders at the fire tells a story of a traveling judge who carried a pouch of bay leaves stitched into his cloak. He said it helped him see liars, the boy says. Or, at least, helped him listen better. Historians still argue whether bay leaves had spiritual properties or were just really good at pretending to. But for thousands of years, people believed in them. And sometimes belief is half the flavor. Night comes colder in the hills. You wrap yourself tighter and chew a crust of bread flavored faintly with bay. It's not sweet. It's not spicy. But it anchors you, like stone beneath your feet. Like names carved into ledgers and passed down through quiet generations. The herbalist shares one last leaf with you pressed into the pages of a tiny book. For dreams, she says, tuck it under your pillow. You do. And as sleep pulls you down, you imagine the secret kings of the Silk Road robed in shadow crowned with herbs and always just a little out of sight. Bay leaves never shouted, but history listened anyway. You descend from the hills into a basin of dust and commerce, a crossroads so tangled with paths, carts, and accents that it might be the Silk Road's beating heart. The smell hits you first, roasting lamb sweat, wet leather, and cutting through all of it something green and citrusy, with a faint whisper of spice. Coriander. Or maybe cilantro, depending on which half of the world you're standing in. The seeds and the leaves have very different personalities, though they share a name and a tendency to start arguments at dinner. You push through the bustle of the marketplace where every merchant claims to offer the most authentic spices west of the Taklamakan. A wiry boy tries to sell you a pouch of ancient coriander blessed by a saint. You're skeptical. It smells more like dusty cumin and optimism. Still, the real stuff is here. You pass a woman grinding coriander seeds into a fine powder with practiced efficiency. The scent rises warm, lemony, and faintly nutty. It settles over the square, like a spell softening the edge of the midday sun. Coriander isn't glamorous. No one sails a fleet for it. It's not seduction in a jar. It's comfort. It's utility. And in some places, it's revolution. A man sitting by a tea stall tells you that centuries ago, a failed tax revolt in a dusty city began with a batch of spoiled coriander. Bread went sour, he says, and so did the people. Historians still argue whether the coriander was really to blame or if it was just a convenient scapegoat for bigger tensions. But in that moment, a spice stall became a spark, and the city never tasted the same again. You drift past stalls selling flatbreads speckled with coriander pickled vegetables steeped in coriander brine, and jars of honey coriander glaze that might have been invented just this week but claim lineage from ancient Persia. Everyone here tells stories, and every story smells faintly of spice. Later, you find yourself outside the market near a well where a group of cooks is experimenting. One tosses coriander seed into a bubbling lentil stew, then slaps a bundle of leaves into a fresh yogurt sauce. The others wince. This is a leaf town, one mutters. They hate the seed here. Oh, please, says another. The seed is the reason the stew doesn't taste like boiled regret. You back away before the coriander debate turns violent. It's a common conflict. You've learned some people adore the fresh green zing of cilantro leaves. Others claim it tastes like soap and treachery. That little twist of genetic roulette splits families and defines cuisines. Historians still argue whether coriander was truly revered across all ancient cultures or if its popularity waxed and waned like a fashionable sandal. But one thing's for sure, it stuck around. You rest under a cloth canopy near the edge of the square. A storyteller begins to spin a tale. A cook who used coriander to poison a tyrant. Or save a prince. Or both, depending on how you season the details. You chew a seed slowly as he talks. It cracks beneath your teeth, releasing citrus and fire. You're not sure which version of the story you believe, but either way, the spice did its job. Coriander is like that. Slips into everything. A background note that changes the entire song. And the Silk Roads were full of songs blended, borrowed, and seasoned with disagreement. As night falls, you lie beside a fire ringed with stones and pass a bowl of rice spiked with coriander and dried apricots. You scoop it with your hands, taste warmth and brightness. Feel the day settle into your bones. Coriander didn't shout. But it never stayed quiet either. And in places like this, where everything intersects, that's more than enough to make a legend. The next morning, you wake to the low, steady sound of bells, small ones tied to the ankles of pilgrims passing through. You sit up slowly, the scent of incense and smoke wafting through the foggy air. The caravan has paused near a hillside monastery carved into the cliffs like a secret being whispered into stone. Someone is making porridge. And it smells strange, nutty, bitter. Like maple syrup had a serious conversation with celery. Fenugreek, you wrinkle your nose. It's not the most inviting aroma, and yet it has a kind of depth that intrigues you. The cook stirs, slowly adding a swirl of clarified butter, and you realize this is the smell of ritual, not indulgence. It's what you'd feed a body before a fast, or a soul before a decision. A young monk in saffron robes gestures to a flat stone near the fire and pours you a bowl. You taste it hesitantly. It's different, earthy, slightly sweet, slightly bitter, like memory made edible. Fenugreek has always straddled the line between food and medicine, and sometimes between sacred and scandalous. In ancient Egypt, it was used in embalming. In India, it appeared in spice blends and postnatal care. The Greeks treated it like a health tonic. The Persians used it to flavor dates and lentils. And throughout the Silk Roads, it appeared in pickles, breads, teas, and the odd love potion. Historians still argue whether fenugreek was a staple or just a convenience. Some suggest it was cheap filler, others claim it was medicinal gold. Either way, its seeds kept showing up tucked into grain stores, soaked into compresses, even crushed into ink for healing charms. The monk sitting beside you says that fenugreek helps the faithful stay warm through winter, and it makes you smell like bread. He adds, smiling with the innocence of someone who has never been stuck in a tent full of sweaty traders eating fenugreek curry. You laugh and nod. Later, as the morning rituals conclude, the monks offer you a tour. Their kitchen is tiny, but it smells alive. Fenugreek is drying in woven trays beside coriander and mustard seed. You watch as one elder toasts a pinch in a dry pan, coaxing out aromas that make your eyes water and your stomach whisper. In a quiet alcove, a scholar explains that in early Islamic medicine, fenugreek was used to warm the body and stimulate appetite not just for food, but for life. It reminds you to feel hunger, she says. You think of all the people who crossed deserts and mountains to trade in cinnamon or cloves, but who ate fenugreek because it was there, because it helped, because it stayed. It was never rare, but it was always ready. That afternoon, the caravan gathers again. The cooks add fenugreek to lentil stew, and someone brews a tea that smells like burnt sugar and regret. You sip it anyway. It tastes honest. Later, a trader tells you that in parts of North Africa, fenugreek was believed to ward off curses. You hang it over your door, he says. The bitter keeps the bitter away. You glance at the brown seeds in your hand, tiny, hard, unimpressive. But somehow they've traveled as far as silk and silver, and you begin to wonder if maybe the measure of a spice isn't how much it cost, but how often someone reached for it. Historians still argue whether fenugreek was an afterthought in elite markets or an anchor in poor kitchens. But here as the sun dips behind the cliffs and the bells jingle into silence, you suspect it was both. That night, wrapped in wool and fenugreek-scented dreams, you sleep beside a monastery older than your language. You dream of flickering lamps, steaming porridge, and someone tracing prayers in fenugreek ink. It doesn't change the world, but it feeds the part of you that hopes it still might. You leave the monastery behind at dawn, the path soft with mist and the scent of damp stone. The quiet here is thick, only broken by the scuff of sandals and the occasional mule bray. As you descend into a new valley, a breeze carries with it a dry, toasty aroma, something nutty, almost smoky. Cumin. You pause, immediately aware of it. Not loud, not sweet, but sturdy, grounded. The spice equivalent of a low voice with gravel in it. You follow the smell to a roadside cook fire where a caravan guard is frying something in a shallow pan. Flatbread, maybe. He sprinkles cumin seeds over it as it cooks, and they pop faintly in the oil like tiny declarations of intent. He catches your eye and gestures. You take a piece. It's hot, chewy, and hits the tongue with warm spice and roasted depth. It's not dramatic. It's not meant to impress. It's meant to last. Cumin has been doing exactly that for millennia. In ancient Egypt, it flavored lamb and preserved mummies. In Greece and Rome, it was kept on the table like we do salt and pepper now. Indian kitchens have used it for thousands of years. Whole ground, dry roasted. Islamic scholars included it in medicinal texts. And throughout the Silk Roads, cumin traveled in pockets, pouches and seed cakes pressed flat for the road. Historians still argue whether cumin's real value was culinary or curative. It supposedly eased digestion, soothed fevers, and even warded off bad luck. One Persian tale claims that a warrior who ate cumin before battle couldn't be harmed by fire. You'd test the theory if it didn't sound like such a fast way to die. You buy a small cloth pouch from a spice seller who insists his cumin comes from the original plant, which means very little. But the smell, pungent, earthy, bright, tells you everything you need to know. This seed has been somewhere. It's seen kitchens and camps and funerals and feasts. Later in the day, you pass through a village built entirely from mud, brick, and muscle. A group of women is preparing a community meal: lentils, rice, garlic, and cumin, lots of it. They laugh as they cook. And one of them tells you that if you spill cumin in a kitchen, it means someone new is coming. You look down. There are seeds everywhere. Cumin isn't glamorous. No one hoards it. No one fights over it at sea, but it lingers. Its taste slips into your mouth and stays. It binds ingredients, ground sauces, lifts vegetables. In the long, hot kitchens of the Silk Roads, cumin wasn't the soloist. It was the rhythm section. At a campfire that night, someone shares a story of a spice merchant who hid his ledger under a sack of cumin, knowing no one would bother stealing it. Smelled too strong, he laughs. Too common. And yet, that same sack flavored 3 royal kitchens on 3 different continents. Common, he says, just means available. Doesn't mean useless. You nod. The fire crackles cumin toasts in a dented iron pan, and the smell wraps around you like worn linen. You think of all the forgotten meals cumin's been in. The ones nobody writes about. The ones that weren't ceremonial or decadent or for foreign dignitaries, but just dinner. The kind that filled bellies and let people sleep. The kind that whispered, "You're home." Historians still argue whether cumin ever deserved more reverence. But reverence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's what you reach for when you don't want to think. That night, you curl beside your packed cumin in your breath and smoke in your hair. No dreams. Just rest. And sometimes that's everything. You've fallen into the rhythm of the road now, each step forward powered by calluses and sheer narrative momentum. The sun is higher today, sharp and unbothered by your discomfort, and the air smells faintly of oil, sweat, and mustard. You weren't expecting that. It's not the sharp yellow condiment kind. This is raw mustard seed, tiny, round, and potent. There's a grinding wheel set up beneath a shade tree, where 2 women are crushing black mustard seeds into paste, their hands moving like they've been doing it since they were born. The scent is intense, hot, bitter, like someone weaponized cabbage. You take a cautious step back. One of the women laughs. "Not for tourists," she says. Too late. Your sinuses are now wide awake. Mustard seeds have long had a way of starting things. Arguments, coughing fits, and apparently minor revolutions. In the southern part of this region, you're told they were used not just in food, but in rituals, in trade negotiations, in curses. They're small, and elder tells you later, pouring a trickle of ground mustard into a pan, but they don't act like it. You can't argue with that. The spice heats, quickly flaring in the oil like a warning shot. In moments, the entire clearing smells like a sermon with vinegar undertones. Mustard is one of the oldest known cultivated spices mentioned in Indian Vedic texts used in Greek medicine, and famously referenced in biblical parables. Historians still argue whether the mustard seed of faith was meant to emphasize small beginnings or intense flavor. Maybe both. You're handed a small dumpling filled with lentils and spiced with mustard. It burns in the best way, tingling, complex, and just short of regret. You eat another. A passing merchant shares a tale of a town that resisted imperial taxation by making every meal unbearably mustard-spiced for visiting officials. No one stayed more than a day, he grins. They called it the village of fire tongues. Another more poetic traveler tells you about mustard fields stretching across valleys like gold dust, and the people who lit their lanterns with mustard oil because it was cheaper than butter. It smelled like purpose, she says, and sometimes war. You're not sure if she's exaggerating. But later, that evening, a man on horseback shows off a scar and claims it came from mustard gone wrong. Not the spice, he says. The politics, which is somehow less reassuring. Historians still argue whether mustard truly influenced social movements or if it just happened to be around while people made bold decisions. But one thing's certain, it had bite. You chew a few raw seeds out of curiosity and immediately regret it. They're peppery metallic and feel like they're staging a protest in your throat. The woman beside you hands over a cup of tamarind water and chuckles. You've been initiated. You'll take it. As night folds over the camp, someone burns mustard husks in the fire. The smell is acrid sharp, strangely nostalgic. Like the memory of being told off, but with affection. You lie back, mustard still buzzing faintly in your mouth, and think of small things with oversized impact. Mustard didn't build palaces, but it may have burned a few down. And on nights like this, when the wind carries smoke and spice across your cheek, you start to believe that not all revolutions need banners. Some just need seeds. The trail has bent eastward again, curling through low forest where the leaves hang thick and humid and everything drips, even the air. You're sweating in places you didn't know could sweat. And then just when you think you might drown in greenery, a new smell cuts through the haze. Sharp, eye-watering, almost fake. Wasabi. You blink confused. That can't be right. Wasabi is from Japan, right? Mountain rivers, misty farms, monks carefully coaxing it to grow. And yet, here you are standing at a spice stall next to a man enthusiastically waving a knobbly green root at you like it's a divine relic. Real wasabi, he declares proudly. Straight from the jungle. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Okay, jungle horseradish. Still kicks your face in. He's not wrong. The paste he offers you smells strong enough to strip paint. You touch the tiniest dab to your tongue and immediately regret your entire past 5 minutes. It's not a burn. It's an event. Like a sneeze. And a panic attack got married and moved into your sinuses. You wheeze. He claps you on the back. Good right. You're not sure if you nod or flinch, but the point is made. The truth is most of what the world calls wasabi isn't. It's horseradish mustard powder and green dye. Real wasabi, Wasabia japonica, is delicate, picky, and almost impossible to grow outside its narrow range in Japan. And it doesn't travel well. The heat fades fast after grading, and the plant needs cold flowing water to survive. Historians still argue whether any true wasabi ever made it across the Silk Road. The records are fuzzy, the roots fuzzier, and nobody agrees on what was actually traded. But horseradish. Oh, that absolutely made the journey. Horseradish root was ground into paste and slathered onto meat in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It was praised for clearing the head, treating respiratory issues, and giving a sharp bite to bland stews. Somewhere along the route, people started calling anything that made your nose cry wasabi. And the myth spread. You listened to a traveler's tale over dinner about a prince who demanded real wasabi with every meal, even though he lived thousands of miles from the nearest mountain stream. His cooks tried everything: coloring turnips, boiling mustard seeds, even soaking leeks in lime juice. When the prince finally caught them, he declared, "It tastes right to me," and promoted the liar to royal chef. You find that story disturbingly believable. Later, you pass a merchant selling authentic wasabi kits that include horseradish root, green chalk powder, and a carved wooden grater. You watch two buyers argue over the correct water temperature for preparation, neither of them aware that they're playing culinary dress-up. And somehow, it still works. The food smells good. The paste stings. The illusion holds. Historians still argue whether the myth of wasabi was ever meant to deceive, or if it simply grew out of necessity. After all, when the real thing costs a fortune, imitation becomes survival. Or art. A cook offers you grilled fish slathered in jungle horseradish. It's hot. Brutally so. But also fresh. Vivid. You cough, wipe your eyes, and ask for another bite. Because maybe that's the thing with wasabi, real or fake. It wakes you up. It doesn't care about authenticity as long as it delivers the hit. And that's what the Silk Roads did too. They moved flavor, sure, but they also moved fantasy. You settle in for the night. No still tingling breath cooled by the echo of something that might have been a lie. Or maybe just a different kind of truth. Wasabi didn't conquer the world, but the idea of it did. And sometimes that's the stronger root. You're deep in lowland now, where the air hangs heavier and even the birds seem drowsy. The trail hugs a wide, lazy river, the banks peppered with reeds and dragonflies the size of your hand. You trudge in silence until a soft, buttery scent curls around your face, like a whisper you forgot to remember. It's vanilla. Or at least something pretending to be. You follow your nose to a trader's stall built on a floating barge, half spice shop, half rumor mill. Hanging from the rafters are thin shriveled pods tied in bundles with red thread. They're leathery, brown-black, and slightly sticky. The trader cuts one open and runs his finger along the pulp inside. The scent that escapes is sweet, yes, but also floral, dark and warm like old books and lullabies. Vanilla. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong anywhere along the Silk Roads. Not really. Because vanilla is New World. Vanilla orchids, specifically. Vanilla planifolia originated in Mesoamerica, nurtured by the Totonac, then cultivated by the Aztecs, and added to their cacao drinks long before Europeans ever tasted either. It didn't arrive on the broader world scene until long after the Silk Roads had started to quiet. So why is it here? The trader doesn't flinch. It's not real vanilla, he says. It's cousin. From orchids. Wild. Tamed by stories. You blink. He hands you a strip of dried pod. It's rough, not as fragrant as the real thing, but close enough to stir something in your brain. A memory of comfort. Or desire. Or maybe just cake. Historians still argue whether vanilla's mystique comes from its scarcity or its complexity. It's the only spice in the world that requires hand pollination when grown outside its native habitat. The orchid blooms for one day. 1. If it's not pollinated in that brief window, there's no pod. No wonder it became symbolic of love, of labor, of longing. The trader tells you that his grandfather once hid a bundle of vanilla pods inside his cloak to escape a siege. Not because they were valuable, but because they smelled like home. Or hope. He might be lying, but you want it to be true. Back at camp, someone is mixing shaved pod with goat's milk and honey, stirring slowly over a fire. You sip from a clay cup and taste something soft, rich, and layered. Not exactly vanilla, but close enough to make you lean into the illusion. Later that night, a writer unwraps a bundle from his satchel and shares a story of a warrior who carried vanilla pods into battle. He said if he died, he wanted to smell sweet when the gods found him. The firelight flickers, the smell of vanilla rising like incense through your dreams. Vanilla didn't travel the Silk Roads, but its memory did. Its shadow danced in perfume bottles and honey jars, and the soft folds of stories retold over stews. People yearned for it before they even knew what they were missing. And somehow, here in the middle of this ancient trade route, the echo of that longing still lingers in a pot of milk. You fall asleep with a pod tied to your wrist like a charm against disappointment. It isn't real vanilla. But tonight it's enough. The final leg of the journey begins not with fanfare, but with silence. You've left behind the clamor of markets, the thrum of foot traffic, even the clatter of mule carts. The world has softened. The trail narrows into a footpath winding through dry grass and half-buried stones. Your pack is lighter now, most of the spices traded, tasted, or quietly stolen. But something else has grown heavier. Your thoughts. You inhale deeply. The air smells like everything. Cinnamon and pepper. Saffron and cumin. Ginger. Anise. Smoke. Sweat. Trade. Time. You exhale. And still it lingers. You crest a final ridge, and there it is, the desert again. Not harsh this time, but quiet, peaceful. A soft bowl of golden silence stretched beneath a sky beginning to bruise purple at the edges. The caravan has stopped for the night, one last time. No one speaks much, not because they're tired, though they are, but because some part of them knows that whatever this was, it's ending. Someone lights a small fire. A pot is placed over it, and in it go the last remnants of the journey: crushed coriander seeds, a flake of dried ginger, a clove, a whisper of turmeric, a few fading petals of saffron. The spice master adds water, stirs, and lets it simmer. You sit in the circle with the others, letting the steam warm your face. It smells like memory. It smells like everything that brought you here, and like something that never quite existed outside this very moment. No one asks what's in the pot. No one needs to. A child, someone's nephew, maybe, holds out a bowl for you first. You sip. The flavor is impossible, familiar and strange, deep and ephemeral. It isn't a perfect blend. It's lopsided, chaotic, alive, like the Silk Roads themselves. Historians still argue whether these spice routes truly changed the world, or if the world was always changing, and they just happened to be there, carrying stories in burlap and clay. Whether cinnamon toppled kingdoms or just sweetened tea. whether nutmeg justified wars or merely flavored their aftermath. But you've walked the roads now. You've tasted the things that weren't supposed to matter, and you've felt them settle into your bones. No one builds monuments to cardamom. No one holds parades for bay leaves. But tonight, under a sky lit by the last embers of fire and stars, you know what changed everything and what didn't. The bowl in your hands is empty, and yet it fills you. You lie back, letting the sounds fade, crackling flame, afar off camels. Grunt, a merchant softly humming a lullaby in a language you don't know. The air cools. The smells drift upward. The spices rise. You close your eyes. And now the fire is low now, just a ring of faint red coals breathing slowly in the dark. You lie, still, listening to the desert wind, to the distant rustle of tent flaps, to the gentle hum of the earth cooling beneath you. The journey has ended, not with a clang, but with a hush. And in that hush, something grows. You feel the slow release of your muscles, the way your limbs finally sink into the ground, like they've been trying to root there all along. The air tastes faintly of clove and ginger, of warmth and endings. The spices linger not loudly, but like the echo of a favorite song half remembered in a quiet room. You think of cinnamon bark crushed in palm of cardamom seeds, hidden in coats of pepper traded for lives and lies. You think of saffron bleeding into milk of turmeric streaking fingertips, with gold of cumin warming the center of a lonely stew. They didn't change the world, not in ways that make maps or monuments, but they colored it, they connected it, they gave it flavor and comfort and desire and mystery. And now, as your breath slows and your eyes drift closed, you carry them with you, not in pouches or jars, but in memory. In the places they touched inside you, soft and unseen. Let them settle there. Let them rest. You are no longer walking. You are floating now adrift on a bed of spice-laden air and sleep-heavy thoughts. Let your mind go dim like the coals. Let the wind hush your heartbeat. Let your story pause. Tomorrow can begin again, but tonight, let these silk roads fade into dreams. Sleep well. Sleep long. Sleep spiced.